see you guys in the dark.
I used to do a lot of online dating because the city where I live is very hard to meet people in. Everyone kind of keeps to themselves. I met this particular champ on OkCupid. I guess you could say I go for a certain type of guy. Tall, handsome, well-dressed, driven, intellectual, with a touch of hipster and geek thrown in there. I guess you could say I have high standards. Therefore, I spent a lot of time screening potential dates with extended messages, chatting or texting before we met in person. I like to believe that because I basically raised myself on the internet, I have a good sixth sense of creeps and weirdos. I call it my FIF. Funny inner feeling. George was everything I seemed to be looking for. He rocked a pompadour and a 6 o'clock shadow with the ease of Ryan Gosling. His profile was rifled with eloquent language, and his messages to me were flowery and deep. We touched upon philosophy, literature, and fantastic music, and I was quickly smitten with him. We started texting, and our texts were similarly full of excellent vocabulary and unique conversation topics. One chilly night, I went out with some of my friends to an independent hip-hop night, and I drank more whiskey sours than I care to admit. While sober, I may not have been so reckless. Tipsy felt like texting George at 1 a.m. asking if he wanted to meet up for pizza. It felt like a good idea. After all, spontaneous generally leads to good things, and excellent adventures, right? I walked into the pizza place, saw George sitting amidst all the empty tables, awaiting me. He was even more beautiful than in his photographs, and my heart skipped a beat. Our conversation rambled and weaved itself for hours. We had an excellent rapport, and I felt entirely at ease with this man. That's when at about 5 a.m. he offered to take me to his house to watch a movie he had made. I was not alarmed. However, I was very firmly told I would be happy to accompany him home. But I was not the sort of woman who fucks on the first date. With a smile that dented his dimples, he told me he respected that and linked his hand with mine. We practically skipped to his home, still babbling wildly at one another. I was so full of excitement. I felt that we had a real, tangible connection. When we reached his abode, I became even more impressed. He lived in the basement of a massive old mansion. He had 5 roommates, all women, and all professional artists. As we tiptoed downstairs to his lair, I was assaulted on all sides by good taste, and that only continued as we hit his cave, full to the brim of awesome art and interesting artifacts. I found myself even more fascinated with him. We both curled up on his bed, comfortably enjoying one another's company, as he queued up the student film he had made a few years prior. It was some sort of 3D mess of colors and lines set to Brian Eno, but truth be told, we weren't paying much attention to it. George stared at me, and then he went in for the first kiss, and then he pulled away. He had changed. His mellow, happy attitude had intensified, but not in a sexy way. His eyes had turned stony, his features had sharpened, and his grip on me tightened. I'm James Bond, you know. I giggled nervously. Suddenly, all my alarm bells were going off at once. I'm sorry, I've never seen any of the movies. His eyes narrowed as he regarded me. What I'm saying is, don't get too close. Don't get close at all. What? We had been having such a great time. I was incredibly confused with the sudden Jekyll and Hyde personality switch. Let's, watch your movie. Attempting to go back out of the situation gracefully, and thinking perhaps he just showed nervousness strangely, I inched slightly away from him and leaned back, trying to appear nonchalant as I fixed my eyes on the TV screen. In reality, I was on alert, every nerve in my body ready for flight. I'm a big girl, not fat, just tall and Amazonian. George was about the same height and build as me, and I knew I could probably take him if something had happened, but I wanted to tactfully extract myself from the situation before that even happened. Backing off seemed like the wrong thing to do. I felt George tense beside me before he jumped on top of me, trying to force his hand up my shirt. "George!" I protested past his reaching tongue. I told you, I'm not going to fuck you on the first date. My heart was beating a drum line in my chest. I didn't want to become violent in case something even worse happened. But I was pushing him off of me as intensely as I dared. Then why the hell did you come over to my house in the middle of the night? I told you, I'm James Bond. As he bellowed in my face, I shoved him off of me and stood up all in one quick motion. As I snatched up my purse and charging phone as quickly as possible, his demeanor softened once again. Look, I'm sorry. I can't. My ex-girlfriend, she really screwed me over, you know. I'm broken. I can't love. He opened his arms, trying to get me to come to him once again. Something deep within me twinged, some inkling of compassion for his suddenly broke man in front of me. But I knew that it was just a ploy. I buttoned up my jacket and shoved on my hat. I need to go home. Again, his expression changed. He set his jaw, and a flash of hatred passed his visage. Fine, I'll walk you out. No, that's okay, I protested. No, I said that I'm going to walk you out. Meekly, I nodded. I made a beeline to the basement door, fumbling with the lock until I was free into glorious, frigid early morning sunshine, my breath fogging in front of me. George followed me like a kicked puppy. At the gate, I paused to say goodbye to him, full of confusion and regret. He stared at me, the man I had met earlier that night, all gentleness and handsomeness aloofness. Then he grabbed both of my arms in a vice grip and attempted to kiss me. I turned my face sideways, and he collided with my cheek. His fingers tightened around my arm so hard that I had bruises the next day. George, you're hurting me. George, I need to catch my bus. Wordlessly, he released me and stoningly watched me walk away until I rounded the corner. I haven't heard from him since then. But I have seen him at the bars, and he is always laughing and looking perfectly normal and approachable. This story happened about a year ago, a couple of weeks after I broke up with my boyfriend of 2 years. I was on the receiving end of a breakup and was completely a mess. I was in college and living at home for the summer in a very small town during the course of these events. A friend was consoling me and creating my very first online dating profile for me, because gay men can sometimes think that more sex is the solution to everything. His intentions were good, and I have to admit that some of the men contacting me were very attractive. I really didn't know how to use the website very well, so I started to text a couple of guys that I had met. This is where Robert comes into play. On the surface, well, below the neck, Rob was about 6'3", a gorgeous man who competed in bodybuilding competitions. Unfortunately, his face looked something like an axe murderer. His teeth were messed up. He wore glasses with those really thin metallic frames, and his hair looked like his mom still cut it. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, and he seemed like a really nice guy. That first night that we texted, we probably stayed up until about 2 a.m. talking about our lives. I heard a few things which weren't really red flags, but are usually turnoffs in what I look for in a date. For a guy in his late 20s, Rob didn't have much of a career. He was a high school track assistant coach, and I wasn't really sure if he got paid for this job. Now on to sex. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit this online, but I am a complete bottom. So when I look for a potential partner, it's important for me that he is a complete top. Anything else just doesn't turn me on. So when Rob admitted to me that he is a versatile top, which means mostly top, but sometimes likes it both ways, I have to admit, I knew I would never meet him. I'm a little bit shallow, I know. Anyway, I tried to be open-minded. The next day, he wished me a good morning and said that we could go on a date that day. I told him in detail how I was just broken up with and didn't really want to meet a guy for dinner and cry from the appetizer to the dessert. He understood and agreed, then asked me out 3 hours later, which was pretty odd. This creeped me out, and I stopped talking to him. Rob began to call me several times a day. What made this stranger was the fact that it was an every day, at just a few specific times. At about 10:17 a.m. and 9:17 p.m. every day. Sometimes he would call 3 times in a row, but always starting at 10:17 a.m. Obviously, I never picked up the phone. Considering I texted Rob for less than a 12-hour period, this began to frighten me. I mentioned the story as a joke to another one of my friends who was a police officer, but he took it more seriously than I expected. He told me that I should delete the profile, which I hadn't thought of doing, and to be very careful. I deleted the profile right in front of him. 30 seconds later, I got a text in all caps saying, "Why did you delete your profile?" I was just startled. I can't say for sure, but it looked like he was monitoring me and my now abandoned profile on the website throughout the day. Getting more uneasy, my morning phone calls began to seriously worry me. Luckily, a week or so, roughly about 40 missed calls later, he seemed to finally be getting the message. I really wish that previous statement was correct. One morning, my mom walked in with the day's mail. She handed me a large manila envelope with a handwritten address that appeared to be scribbled by a child. I thought it was a piece of artwork from one of the several students that I babysit, so I opened it happily. I have never been more wrong in my life. Out of the envelope came a 2-page long type letter, a complete chat log of our conversation on the website, a complete text log of our SMS conversation, and a full 8x5x11 copy of my profile photo taken from the website. I should also mention I have absolutely no idea how he obtained my address. I also don't even know how you can make a text log without typing up the entire conversation itself. And he must have copied my photo from the website long before that. Pretty weird. I immediately began sobbing at the 20 pages of horror that fell out of that envelope. I will also admit that to this day, I have never read the typed message. All I know is that it ended with a huge, creepy smiley face. My mom saw that I was crying, and I told her that I was being stalked. She asked me, "Who is doing this?" And I gave her Rob's full name. What happened next completely sent me over the edge. My mom began crying too, and told me that Rob had emailed her, pretending to want to donate for charity. My mom began to freak out as well when he began to ask about her children, and she stopped the email conversation. Now both of us are crying. I called the local police department and told them that I had been stalked, and somehow the man had found my address. He was also contacting my family members. A police was sent out to our house, and he went through all of our documents, told us that although he had clearly become angry, he wasn't threatening violence, and there was nothing that the police could do. After staying until we had both calmed down and talking a few scenarios out, when we were walking the police officer to his patrol car, an unfamiliar car was parked across the street. It was Rob. After being such an emotional wreck from the day, for some reason, I didn't get too spooked in that moment. The police officer didn't realize who he was, but once Rob saw me standing with the cop, he probably got nervous, and I never heard from him again. I'm female, and at the time of the story, I was 16 years young, and every ounce of naive that a 16-year-old can handle. It was around 2003-ish. I started chatting up a dude on some forum because his username had the same likes of an Incubus lyric in it. I swooned. He added me on MSN, and we continued to talk for quite some time. I lied about my age, saying that I was 18, and he was 20-something. Skip forward a couple of months. We had some phone conversations, and he seemed like a relatively awesome dude, and I wanted everything to do with that. Turns out he only lived a 2-hour jaunt from me. So the logical thing to do is to tell him my address to come pick me up. Stupid, I know. First date was extremely awkward. Bowling and soda pop. I could tell he was interested, but just didn't know how to communicate without computers between us. I gave it a second shot after our phone conversations continued, and he expressed some frustration that he had such terrible first date jitters. My school was hosting a battle of the bands, so I figured it would be a more social setting for us to communicate. The guy picks me up at home and literally showers me with gifts. A very expensive Incubus t-shirt, a birthstone ring, some small origami hearts all in a wooden box he had handmade, along with some flowers. I was taken back, but thought it was super sweet. Just much for a second date, especially after the first one was so awkward. We're at the concert, and he starts talking to some of my friends. There's a band that I want to see, so I walk away from the table we were sitting at. Band finishes, and I turn around. He's gone. I looked for him and asked around, and he had decided to give my friend a ride home without letting me know, and he had no intentions of returning for me. I had to grab a ride with my neighbors. Needless to say, I was upset and decided the relationship was a no-go. I broke it off over the phone. He continuously emailed me for the next couple of days. He didn't know what he was doing and feared he made the biggest mistake of his life. He started sending me stuff. At first it was just letters, then gifts, more flowers, CDs of him singing songs, then lockets of hair and condoms he had ejaculated into. I should have told my parents at this point, but was afraid of getting in trouble for lying about my age and meeting someone from the internet. I was mostly ignoring these things, occasionally asking him to stop. My sister, who was 17, approached me one night when we were home alone and asked me about a guy who had added her to MSN and was gushing about how in love he was with me. I was sitting near her and told her to just ignore him. She thought that it was funny and urged him on. She told him to come over and she would help us work it out. I was devastated. I explained everything that had happened and she started freaking out. We locked up and shut off the lights, went downstairs and called my parents. My father came home, walked outside when the guy pulled in. He immediately turned around and left. No word from him for about a week. One day my sister is on the internet and says, "Oh shit, you need to look at this." And I see his username and that my sister had downloaded a file from him. It is a video of him carving my name into his chest. At the end, he looks at the camera dead on and says, "This is my final goodbye." I never heard from him again. Checked newspapers from his area for suicides because I was that freaked out. Years later, I found him on Facebook. I stalked his pictures a little bit. You can still see my name scarred into his chest. Nowadays, it's easy to connect with someone. All you have to do is pick up your phone, download an app, and boom. Now you can see all the eligible bachelors in a closer radius without even getting out of bed. But just a year ago, something happened that changed my mind about online dating forever. I was 21 at the time and getting a bit tired of mundane life. I was scrolling through a popular dating app, and that's when I saw him. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed, pretty smile, perfect. We instantly matched and agreed on dinner and cuddles at his place. Yes, I know, never go to a stranger's house on the first date, but I was trying to score a home run, if you know what I mean. I shower, slip on my favorite pair of matching knickers, throw on a big t-shirt and shorts, rubbed on my favorite perfume, and I was out the door. When I pulled up to his 3-story townhome, I thought, his living arrangements seemed to match up with his line of work, so of course I had no doubt that he was who he said he was. I go up to the door and knock. About 15 seconds later, the most handsome man that I've ever laid eyes on opens the door. Instantly, we connected. We dated for about 4 weeks, when one day he looks over at me and says, "Can I tell you something?" "Well, of course, babe," I quickly answered him, eager to hear what he had to say. He looks me dead in the eyes, straight-faced, and says, "When I saw you on that app, I planned on killing you." His hand reaches over and caresses mine, but then I changed my mind. Chills went down my spine, as I knew he was not joking. Completely paralyzed in fear, I just stared at him. I was unable to speak. I couldn't even move. He moves in closer and says, "Babe," and that's when I snapped out of it. I grabbed my purse, ran out of his house, blocked and deleted his number, and quite frankly, deleted the whole app. So, to the hot guy from the dating app, let's not meet ever fucking again. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.